Welcome to the Psychedelia Podcast, where we talk about the third wave of psychedelics. Through our many wide-ranging conversations with scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and event organizers, we bring you an exclusive look into the many minds of the psychedelic world. It's time to let the word out about psychedelics and how they can be used as tools to benefit both the individual and the community. Welcome to the third wave.
Hey listeners, and welcome back to the Psychedelia Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Paul Austin. We have another super duper show for you today. Our guest is Mike Zappy Zapolin, entrepreneur and psychedelic advocate. Zappy is the director of the award-winning documentary, The Reality of Truth, an exploration of the mystical and spiritual insights that the psychedelic experience can offer. In our episode, we talked to Zappy about his advocacy, the future of psychedelics in the modern world, and how we can reach a critical mass of spiritual evolution. I enjoyed this podcast with Zappy. He's a different type of guest. So far on our podcast, we've interviewed a lot of people who are pretty involved with the more mainstream psychedelic world. These are people that I've met at conferences. These are people who are involved in organizations. And, I only heard of Zappy because I watched his Reality of Truth documentary at the World Ayahuasca Conference in Rio Branco last October. And I've been kind of keeping an eye on him. And I wanted to bring him on the podcast to get his perspective from, he's an entrepreneur. He worked on Wall Street for some time, on his perspective on psychedelics and where he sees things going. I would consider him to be a visionary in many ways, and I like talking to people who think 5 or 10 years in the future. So you'll really enjoy this podcast. I think you'll get a new angle or perspective on how psychedelic use will grow and what that will mean for our culture in the next 5 to 10 years in listening to this podcast. A couple of announcements before we get going. I want to encourage, if you're listening to this, you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. And I'm going to incentivize you guys as well, offer a little special something. If you leave a review, you send me a screenshot over email, I'll send you a free book, our free microdosing book. So leave a review, send me the screenshot, I'll give you a free microdosing book as thanks for helping out to spread the word and the message. Second thing I want to mention is our forum is up and going. It's at forum.thethirdwave.co. It's slow still. It's growing. I'm recording this in March 2017. It's growing in popularity. We're going to do a big push next month to make sure that it gets some ground and some legs. But I would appreciate, if you feel like involving yourself in psychedelic community online. There's already some threads that are up and going. Go over there and check it out. Say hi, introduce yourself, do all that, and start getting involved in the community. It would be a pleasure to get to know you. So again, Mike Zappy Zapolin, enjoy the podcast, and please leave a review on iTunes. Thanks, guys. Hey, Zappy, thanks so much for being on the Psychedelia podcast. It's an honor to have you on here.
I appreciate you guys evangelizing like you are, so I'm excited to be talking to you. This is nothing else I'd rather be doing.
That's phenomenal to hear, and it's great to hear from someone of your stature and of your credentials. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your pre-psychedelic life and what got you into the psychedelic experience?
Yeah, sure. I grew up near Boston. Suburb of Boston. And, when you grow up in Boston, it's pretty awesome because you got, Cambridge and Harvard Square and Harvard, and you got all these, students, maybe 100,000 plus a year in Boston. So it always stays really young and really fresh and feels, when you're a kid and you're young, in your early teens, you can go to Harvard Square and hang out with college kids and adults and be under the radar and just nobody really cares. They just think you're a student. So I think growing up in Boston and Harvard Square and all that, I got an advanced, education and, everything that was going on that college students were doing. And I got ahead of myself to some degree and, seeing different things, including psychedelics and things. But I wasn't really like a heavy user or anything like that. And I really, in my life, early on, only had a few psychedelic experience, but they were always really profound to me. They felt like the spiritual connection sort of thing that I was looking for, that other people were looking for when you're told in life about, religion and God and all these different things. And I had a sense that when I had those psychedelic experiences that I was tuning into something that was sort of spiritual, felt kind of spiritual at least. I wasn't necessarily, I was probably doing them like a kid, exploratory, have a good time. I wasn't really, trying to have a spiritual experience, but I noticed that there was something spiritual that I had tapped into there. And so, I was going about my life and, graduated college. I got lucky. I got to work on Wall Street during the late 80s. And I never really, loved working on Wall Street, even though I was, at a great place and everybody, including myself, was making a lot of money. But I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And I saw that that infomercials were a new thing that you could just, buy programming on TV, make your own show. And that really interested me. And a friend and I left the Wall Street and I started to do that and started to do some production around putting companies on TV and buying the airtime. And as I was doing that and it was going really well with the infomercials. And I just kept thinking, I wish I had a really, 24-hour network of my own where I could play this stuff and sell products and things. And I saw the internet in the late 90s, 97 or something. And I was like, wow, that's like my own 24-hour network. I could just put stuff out and, people can buy stuff. This is going to be incredible. And so I basically, looked at how to get involved for myself. And I realized that the domain names were going to be a big thing, and I thought, wow, why don't I develop one of those into something and spend a few years developing like an internet brand. And so I made a list of, I wanted it to be a big enough category, like a category name, a .com, that if I worked on it for a few years, it would be worth doing. And so I made a list. I called it my Super Bowl list, who advertises at the Super Bowl. It was like beer, cars, computers, insurance, diamonds, credit cards. And the first one on the top of the list was beer. So I was like, I wonder who owns beer.com. And I looked it up and it was a young kid. And so long story short, I bought beer.com from this kid in 1998 and fixed it up into a, what looked like kind of a beer marketing site. And I put some press out about what I was doing. And I got calls from all the beer companies. And I wound up selling it after buying it from this kid for $80,000. A few months later, I sold it to Interbrew, who owns Labatt and Rolling Rock and Bass Ale, for $7 million. So I was like, wow, this is a good business. Let's go. So I went back to the list. I wound up acquiring diamond.com and creditcards.com eventually, and had, a lot of good business experience doing that. And, at the same time, I was always sort of, looking into, ways to raise the consciousness of the business that I was working on, how to, maybe eliminate some of the process involved and all these things. And I found that when I kind of tapped into, what I'll call secrets of nature, I could do really well using some of those thoughts about that in business. And so without getting too off on a tangent, about 10 years ago or so, I had done some writing about Jewish mysticism called Kabbalah. And it's kind of like the secrets of the universe. And I realized that there was a lot of meditation involved in it, and that there was even potentially some plant medicine things, herbal things that were, known, and energies, because everything was being just described as energies. So I thought about my own psychedelic experiences and things that I had. And I realized that in one of those experiences, I had really seen, everything as energy, everything as just energy. And I looked at it and I realized in that moment, it was one of the most important moments of my life, where I was looking at it, seeing, trillions of atoms spinning in my hand, and then looking at the desk and all these trillions of atoms. And I was like, wow, I'm made out of the same thing as that. I'm just vibrating at a different frequency.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my God, everything's just frequency. And I was like, wow, and, you have a revelation like that, and it's it's going to cause you to see things differently in your everyday life. And so, that took me into, I worked with Deepak Chopra on a project related to Kabbalah, and I, got to know him 10 years ago or so. And then back about 5 years ago, I asked him to be involved with me and some other people in a movie, a documentary, which is called The Reality of Truth. But it basically is like me and friends trying to go inside of our own minds for answers and healing, and to take some of these psychedelics that we either had done or hadn't done and have that direct experience and see if it was something that was spiritual, if it was something that helped us in our life, and if it was something that maybe society could potentially use for some of the, larger problems at a macro level. And so Deepak said, yeah, I'd love to do this with you and chaperone you guys and be like your, part of your team. But I want to make sure that you're having the experience yourself, that you're taking people on this journey with you.
And had Deepak, had he previously used psychedelics? Was he,
Yeah.
Had he?
Yep.
Okay.
So Deepak is really open. He's an open book. And he had said that early on that his first experience with spirituality was when he was 17 years old and he took LSD. And, that's from, one of the top spiritual teachers. That's a serious statement to make, that, he found something within there that was spirit. And, he was willing not only to talk about it, but he understood that there were things like ayahuasca and, ibogaine and San Pedro, some things that he hadn't had experiences with, but that he was wide open to, as far as being, if you're in the right set and setting with the right people, and you're doing it, like Deepak says in the movie, if you're doing it with the right intent, then it can't go wrong. If your intent is to expand your consciousness, then it's going to go great. And so that was kind of like the guiding principle of the movie was, hey, let's have the right intent, see if we can expand our consciousness. We did a reintegration with Deepak, and, you probably saw in the movie, Michelle Rodriguez, you see her transform through the movie as she has these different experiences with the plant medicine. And it's just really, that's why I think documentary films are so amazing, is because you can, see the transformation not only on screen with your own eyes and feel the energy, but, we were able to a year later get together, 2 years later, and look at how she had integrated it into her life, high highs and low lows, being a superstar, having friends die, things like, everything that happens in life. But for people to see it, what I think we in part accomplished our goal with the film, which was to kind of bring down people's fear level about doing some of these plants to go inside their own minds for answers. And what we were saying was, here's these people, that have a lot to lose, and, they feel compelled to take the time and go inside their mind. They could be off doing whatever and, running after ego and all that kind of stuff, but they're taking the time to go inside. And then the fact that they're willing to share that, I think, hopefully we accomplish just making it some of these things, whether it's ayahuasca or San Pedro or any other, thing, psychedelic, that we brought down like the threshold of anxiety for people to say, you know what, it looks like these guys had a good experience and they benefited. So, maybe there's something for me to in here, and I don't need to be afraid, because, like Aubrey Marcus says in the movie really well, everybody's number one fear is, oh God, what if I want, all of a sudden I do it and then I want to be a yoga instructor and I lose the part of myself that I really love. And you could see in Michelle and some of these other people that they had this transformation, but they were still the same person that they were beforehand.
And, Aubrey also says in that same part of the show, well, even if you do become a yoga teacher, you'll probably be even happier than you were before.
Yeah.
Which I think, it speaks to the necessity of acceptance when we sometimes go through these transformative experiences. Yeah, no, that's true. It is great what Aubrey says, because I think it's, again, doesn't happen to everybody, but you want to know that, if your life could be totally transformed, or you may just, experience what you love doing in a, more
conscious way or some, new way. So it's really, that's what I love about the cast of the Reality Truth. It's like, from Deepak to Michelle to Aubrey to Peter Coyote to Ram Dass, all these people, it's like when you hear them say, yes, do this, it's worth, if you're doing it with the right intent, it's worth doing. And so that's, I think, the power of those type of people who had, Ram Dass was a doctor, somebody might be a celebrity, somebody might be a wealthy business person. But at the end of the day, like everybody else, they want to, have a spiritual experience. They want to feel like they're living a spiritual existence and that their life is worthwhile. And so that's why I say, at this point, that's what people have to really consider. I mean, if you live your whole life and you never go deep inside, whether it's with plant medicine or some other psychedelic that maybe isn't, a plant, but it's, it's something like ketamine or MDMA or something like that. And if you're on a desert island and you're going to spin around like a whirling dervish, maybe you got to do that. But every way you go inside, that is probably where the answers and the healing is going to come from. And if you don't do that, it's possible you just completely wasted your life living on the surface level reality that's not real anyways.
Exactly. And, another one that you mentioned in the documentary is transcendental meditation. Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what is transcendental meditation?
Yeah. So basically, the Maharishi is credited with bringing transcendental meditation to America and, training the Beatles in meditation. And now there's, 7 million people doing it. But basically what transcendental meditation is based on the theory that your mind naturally wants to settle down, but you've just never been given the technology to understand how to settle your mind down. So what you do is you put your conscious mind on a really simple thing, something really easy like saying a mantra silently to yourself, repeating a mantra, and you just stay on that task, and invariably thoughts are going to come. And when you realize that you're thinking in transcendental meditation, which naturally you will, when you realize that you're thinking, you come back to the mantra and put your conscious mind back on that very simple task. And eventually your conscious mind's going to go, oh, okay, I'm on this simple task. And your larger mind is going to be able to settle itself down and relax itself into a transcendental state. And ultimately you're trying to really stay in that transcendental state where you're in a realm of consciousness that would be called like God consciousness or universal consciousness. And that's where, when you dip down in there, that's where people like David Lynch or Jerry Seinfeld or Martin Scorsese, that are all transcendental meditators, it's understood that that's where you can pull ideas from and thoughts that are larger than just the surface level activity. So when you practice it and you do it regularly, not only do you transcend and dip in there, but when you come back into action, your part of you is still in that transcended state. So you can make decisions without, getting rattled, or make the right decisions because you're taking information from a greater source than just what you're seeing with your eyes or hearing with your ears.
Which sounds a lot like psychedelics as well,
Exactly.
Like those creative breakthroughs that we have when we allow ourselves to go really inwards. I mean, Steve Jobs talks about how, one of the 3 most important experiences of his life was doing LSD. You have all these people in Silicon Valley and tech people, yourself, who had these transformative experiences. Now, for you, what did you find to be more effective or interesting? Plant medicine or transcendental meditation? Or what were some of the differences or similarities?
I would say that they're very, very similar. The benefit of meditation is that you can do it without needing to put any external energy into your energy. You use your own apparatus, but at the same time, we have so much, coming at us from society and, environmental factors in society and institutions pounding away, that it's very difficult to put yourself into that transcendental state sometimes. Some people never even have the tools to get there. And then when you don't have those tools, or let's say you come back from war and your fight or flight, reflexes turned on, it's very hard to say to a person, oh, okay, just sit down over there, do the mantra, clear, let your mind relax. And it's really tough. It's like these people need some kind of a catalyst to break them through at least one time, and then they have a much bigger target to go after when they're meditating. So people who've done psychedelics and done them properly in the right set and setting and had the right experiences to expand their consciousness, when they meditate, they're able to very quickly kind of see the target and go towards it, kind of go into their psychedelic experience using meditation. So it's an amazing daily practice to have, especially anybody who's doing psychedelic work. I would say the two go kind of hand in hand. But I will say that I did notice, and I definitely called out, a lot of people who we interviewed about how they get into that transcendental state. It turned out that most, if not all, of the main thought leaders and people in positions, high up in these different organizations, thought leaders, gurus, all these people, they had a psychedelic experience. Maybe it was in the 1960s or something like that, but it was part of who they were. And I said to Deepak too, and I asked him on camera, I said, and this isn't in the movie, but I said, would you be who you are right now if you hadn't had that psychedelic experience? And he was like, I definitely would not be exactly who I am. It was one of the most profound things that happened to me and opened up the door for me to be me and all that kind of stuff. But you could see that across the board, even the people who say, just meditate, just sit down and meditate. You don't need the psychedelic. It's like, yeah, if you don't have any PTSD and you haven't been damaged in some way by society or something, sure, maybe you can just, sit down and do the mantra and relax and enjoy your meditation. But if that's not the case, you probably need some kind of a catalyst that's going to break you through. And I think that's the important part about psychedelics, why it's almost like should be a rite of passage. It's like if they can tell you that they can send you off to war to go get killed, they also should have to give you a psychedelic experience so that they can say, okay, now you understand you're not just physical, there's more going on than you realize. And it's really probably society's duty to give everybody that rite of passage in the right set and setting when they reach a certain age, especially if on the contrary, they're going to be able to require you to go off to war and kill people or be killed or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that's something that we've talked about on the show before. This is something that I've read from like Joseph Campbell or Alan Watts. We don't really use psychedelics in our Western culture. There's all these taboos and stigmas against them, even though they've been used for thousands of years and as like initiations, to help people really, do what you're saying, get in touch with this higher sense of spirituality, go through this experience so that they understand they're not just flesh and bone, that there is a spirit to them. And, I think unfortunately in our culture, we've replaced spirit with materialism. And we're now paying the price of that with ecological crisis and with a bunch of other shit that's just, not good.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't blame anybody for not knowing about these things. The wool's been pulled over their eyes by society for a long time, and, the reason I wrote the letter to President Trump that I published in the New York Times, it wasn't accusational or anything like that. I was basically just trying to educate, saying, hey, there's this plant, ibogaine, that's growing out of the ground that's been shown to be safe and effective in breaking addiction, and you could use it to heal the opiate epidemic that we're going through. And I was basically in the full page New York Times, I was urging him to make the opiate epidemic a first 100-day issue. And basically, like I said, I don't blame anybody for not knowing about ibogaine or ayahuasca or any of these ketamine or any of these things, because we're in the educational phase. It's like Timothy Leary said, if people treated dying in in a way that was really, really positive. And the hospitals were these beautiful places where people went to die and all their family came and celebrated that they were passing over. People would have a much different feeling and everything related to death. So I think if people have been told for the last 50 years, hey, this stuff's really good. There's medicinal value in these plants for disease, for depression, for addiction. They're very positive. Make sure you take some of this every day. Make sure you microdose some of this, and we treated it like traditional medicine, we'd be in a much better place. And people would have the right feeling about it, because I think a lot of the times, people, even, marijuana and things like that, people sneak around and hide doing it, or their family looks down on them, where if society had been telling you, hey, you know what, a lot of people are supposed to have cannabinoids and you're supposed to have some of this THC and it's really good for you, like fluoride in the water, people would be getting even a lot more benefit from these things, because they wouldn't have to do them with the thought in their mind that maybe somehow this isn't good for them, isn't super positive like it could be.
Right, that kind of taboo, or I even had that, similar to you. I had these really amazing experiences when I was 19 and 20, with LSD and mushrooms, and I was really, I felt guilty about them for a long time. There's a lot of stigma that's kind of like we're indoctrinated with, and what you're talking about in terms of people feel like they can't talk about these things. People feel like if they talk about them, they're going to be shunned and they're going to be kind of put to the side, and that's really sad, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in a golden moment where back when in the 60s, let's say, when, Timothy Leary and people were trying to bring out the value of these things, it was tough because, you only had a few television networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. You only had a couple of major newspapers in the country. And now you got the internet, which is disintermediating information so that people are getting this type of information that they need on things. And that's happening at the same time. And then on top of that, you got a situation where, nature itself is bringing these things out. This is like the grand plan of nature. And a lot of times the transcendental meditators, Maharishi, he always talked about going with nature. Go with nature. Don't fight it. Just go with it. And then you can be in support of nature, and you'll have a really easy time, and you'll accomplish all your dreams and all that. And I thought about it's bringing out these plants. It knows that people are depressed and have issues like that, and that there are diseases that need cures. So it's bringing out these medicines, and it's, you can see marijuana is coming out first, and it's coming out across the world. And nature's doing that and basically, opening people up to, hey, you know what? I tried this marijuana. I tried this herb, this plant. It wasn't as bad as they said it was. And I actually feel better, and it helped my kid or my mom or whatever it was. And so, maybe I don't have to, distrust these things. Maybe there's some other things I can look for in nature. Maybe, I need to go deeper now. And so I think I'm just trying, like you are, to support what nature's already bringing out. And when you're on that path, it's a really easy path. Just flow with it. It's like, you're going with the winning team, and you're just sliding along with it going, wow, this is going really well. You're in support of nature. So I think, nature's smart enough to bring cannabis out, and it knows that between ibogaine and ayahuasca, these things that could, boost your immune system, cure major diseases, major mental health issues, that it's coming, and that's the plan. And I was, you and I were talking before about, why we're doing what we're doing and why we're passionate about it. I just think, it would be really easy to kick back and go, I don't care, wait 10, 20 years. Nature's got its plan. It'll bring out the cannabis and bring out the ayahuasca and the ibogaine, and everything will be great. But I don't think we have the time to wait right now. I think we're in a critical situation where, between, even horrifying thoughts like biological weapons and nuclear weapons and destruction of the planet, these things, they're happening so fast and can happen in an instant, that how do we change what's going on? How is that even possible? Because everybody has their preconceived notions and prejudices and things like that. And the only way that I've ever seen where people instantly change their perspective and gain dramatically more empathy is when they do psychedelics. So I started this, I'll call it a movement, and it's called Your Mind Has Rights. Your Mind Has Rights. And it's basically demanding the right for people to go inside their own minds for answers and healing using any means necessary that seems to be safe, that it seems to be not affecting other people, and that if they have addiction or depression, nobody should be keeping them from these plants that are growing out of the ground that have been shown to be safe and effective. So, bottom line is we really need a critical mass of people going inside their own minds for answers and healing. And then when they have the shift and they have more empathy, now we can talk about politics and race and terror and the environment. And we can have a multi-100-year perspective and think about people and have empathy for people in the future, people on the other side of the world. And so I sound like a broken record these days, because every time somebody goes, oh my God, what are we going to do about the food crisis? What are we going to do about the environment? What are we going to do about overcrowding? It's like same answer. It's like we need a critical mass of people to go inside their own minds and change their perspective and their level of empathy. It's totally simple. And nature's providing these energies that are coming out of the ground. They're just frequencies, and then you put them into your frequency, and then you metabolize those or you synthesize those with your frequency, and that changes your frequency. And so it's really, really simple. I mean, that's the good news, is we're on the precipice of people realizing that these are safe and effective. They have spiritual components to them. You don't lose who you are, you gain, and that if you do it in the right set and setting, it's going to be a positive thing in your life. And then you can be part of that critical mass of people. Like Maharishi, again, back to transcendental meditation, he always said, if a critical mass of people were doing transcendental meditation, they were transcending and they were on a plane of consciousness together, that his number was the square root of 1% of a population. So if the square root of 1% of a population is resonating at a certain frequency, that it'll affect the other people around them and it'll grow exponentially. So basically, we just need a critical mass of people using psychedelics and changing their perspective and increasing their empathy, and we could literally solve every single thing that we call a problem. It's very solvable as long as people are, like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness or thinking that got you into the problem. It's like we've got to change our consciousness to solve these things, and the easiest, quickest, immediate way is psychedelics, period.
Absolutely. So from your perspective, from the work that you've done with the documentary that you shot, with the work that you've done with the ketamine clinic, which I want to get into in a little bit after we kind of keep going, what do you think is the best way for people who are sitting at home to get involved and to get other people involved? What's a good way to do that?
So, the best thing to do is to do what feels comfortable for you, whatever's the path of least resistance. So you've made up your mind that, hey, you know what? I like to go into my mind. I'm checking out this meditation, but it doesn't seem like it resonates with me completely, or I don't think I can do it completely. And maybe I need some other catalyst. And you look into these different catalysts, using the internet, using people around you, and you find what resonates with you and what you feel most comfortable with. So Kismet being like, your destiny. It's like, people that are coming there to get a ketamine infusion treatment for depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicidal ideation, addiction, all these major, major things that most of them are treatment resistant to. They come to the ketamine clinic because ketamine is a very safe but very powerful psychedelic that is what you would call, basically what it's doing is it's causing your brain to disassociate. So it's basically letting your brain communicate in a way without your ego and your consciousness getting in the way. And what happens is it builds neural pathways in the brain. It's FDA approved. They use it on children as an anesthetic because it's so safe. But they realized, Yale University did a really large study, and they realized that in a low dose infusion, ketamine breaks depression and anxiety and these things within hours instead of months and years and never. So the amazing thing about this is that the transformation that people get, and the segue that I was making is, for some people, if I tell them, hey, you know what, no problem, you feel like, you want to have a breakthrough, go down to Peru, sit with a shaman, get in the right set and setting. And they're like, whoa, if I tell my family I'm going to go do that, they're going to like lock me in a mental institution, or they're going to like try to stop me. It's just not going to happen. Number one. Number two, some of the people are like, well, what if I don't get the right brew, or what if I don't get the right shaman? How do I have more certainty? And so as I was working on, trying to figure that out in my own life and for friends and people like that, I realized that, hey, you know what? There's this way that people can go to a Western medical doctor that they and their family are comfortable with, and they can be seen by a doctor, they can be in their own neighborhood, but they can have a dissociative experience using ketamine. And that experience is probably going to not only change their life, but it's also going to open them up to a new way of living and being and so forth. So if you're in a Western society, maybe, ketamine is the first step. If you're living in a Latin country where it's part of some of your culture, maybe you go towards that. If you're near or associated with, somebody Native American, and you could access and feel comfortable, doing something with peyote and Native Americans, it's like whatever is most comfortable for you is how I think you should start, because then if you go in with the intent of having a good experience, and then you're in a good set and setting for you, you're going to have a great experience. It's going to change your life. And you're going to be part of that, critical mass that's changing society's consciousness.
Yes, and I think that's a good point. Now, I wanted to ask you: have you done ketamine before? Have you tried it before?
Yeah, so I have gone through the treatments, and it's a very powerful experience. And it's not like anything people have done before if they haven't had the experience. Meaning, people come in and a lot of people, they've never done any psychedelics at all. They're just treatment resistant. They're depressed. They're suicidal. They're just really, miserable, and they don't want to feel that way. And so they're willing to do anything. And they know that this is, Cleveland Clinic just called ketamine a top 10 medical breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And it was the only mental health thing on the list. So that makes it the number one mental health breakthrough. And I would say it's probably going to wind up years from now being credited as the biggest breakthrough in mental health that's ever happened for humans. Because what happens is when you get the infusion low dose, which is different than people are doing it recreationally, where they're snorting, higher doses and not really knowing what areas of your brain can work and communicate on their own without your ego, your consciousness being in there. You can live 1,000 lifetimes in 45 minutes is what happens. And I describe it as, people always say, well, is it like LSD? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, is it like anesthetic when you go to the dentist? And I'm like, no, it's nothing like that. What it is that's so profound about it, it's basically like Ram Dass says in his book, Be Here Now. You want to be in the now. You don't want to be in the future, worried about it. You don't want to be in the past with regrets. You want to try to put yourself in the now. That's the moment that he's telling you to set yourself in. Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now. So all of these masters are saying being in the now is what you need to do in order to resonate in a peaceful way, in a way that's going to be fulfilling. And the ketamine remarkably puts you in the now. So for 30 minutes of your 45-minute infusion, when you're in that dissociative state, you're in the now. There is no past and there is no future. And like Timothy Leary, famously said about when they asked him what he thought about dying, Timothy Leary said, I can't wait. I think it's going to be the most amazing time of my life, because in the 2 minutes to 15 minutes when your heart stops but your brain's still going. You got, billions of neurons whirring, and you could live 1,000 lifetimes in that 2 to 15 minutes. And that was what he was talking about, was being in that now, being in that state. And so the fact that ketamine can safely put you in that state, and you have this experience of, being able to look at your life, being able to evaluate what's important, what's real, and have a spiritual experience. Most of these people are having this spiritual experience for the first time in their lives. When that happens and they come out, there's no way they could be depressed like they are or have the same level of anxiety. And so the idea with the ketamine, the protocol that they've come up with, is that you do a series of 6 treatments and you build those neural pathways in your brain, because when the science is that when the ketamine metabolizes after your treatment in the hours after, it metabolizes into hydroxynorketamine, which is what's building those neural pathways around trauma, depression. And it's kind of the science, but it's also the miracle of that experience that, instead of like most antidepressants and things that are trying to block things or mute out the symptoms, the ketamine is actually building these neural pathways, and it's in a building state. So super powerful. I think the yin and yang of the ketamine is that people who do that probably should do some plant medicine as the yin yang of that, where, in plant medicine, a lot of times there's that, reconnection to nature. It brings you back to nature, which people have lost. And so the ketamine being this galactic experience and the entire universe, when you yang that with the plant medicine and tying you back to nature, it's like you really probably at that point have some, like Maharishi says, some kind of invincible quality to you, because you have gone through the door and you're carrying forward what you brought through the door, and your energy has an invincibility to it.
So is this ketamine, who is it available for? Like, could I just go to a ketamine clinic and get an infusion, or do you need to have like a doctor's recommendation, having been depressed or, having PTSD, something like that?
So a doctor needs to make the call. My partner in the ketamine Kismet clinic is a medical doctor. And so he's the one who makes the call as far as that somebody has PTSD or depression or anxiety or something like that. But the thing about it is, in our society right now, is that pretty much everybody has some level of PTSD. If you're living in this world right now, there's some scary stuff going on. People, have been traumatized in different situations. So it's not that you have to, come with, a list of all the medications you've tried and they haven't worked, even though a lot of the people that are coming, at least initially now, they've tried all the medications. They've gone up in doses and they tried the electroconvulsive therapy on the brain and all that stuff, and none of it's worked. And they're really scared because they're like, wow, if this ketamine doesn't work, I'm pretty much out of options. And I'm really nervous. And then they get the ketamine infusion and boom, they're like, wow, that's the first thing that ever took me in a different direction. I feel how it positively took me in a healing direction. And so I had Michael Lohan, who's Lindsay Lohan's dad, and I've had come to the clinic, and I've had family members and myself and so forth. And all of them, when I asked them about, like Michael Lohan's got a testimonial on the Kismet Clinic site, and he mentions the word spiritual experience as part of what happened to him during it. And another testimonial from a family member talking about addiction, and said it was the spiritual aspect of it that was the switch being flipped. And of course, the science is, again, that the ketamine in the hours after is building these new neural pathways and things. But it's amazing because, like the Cleveland Clinic is saying, this ketamine for depression is a medical breakthrough. And how it works scientifically, you can point your finger to the metabolization and these things, but there's 2 parts to it. There's really, as you know yourself, there's that experience of being in the now, that God conscious experience, that when you have that, you can't put that back in the hat. It's out. It's out of the genie bottle. And so it's going to be a big part of society in the future. It's a real breakthrough. And like I say, people, even during the making of the Reality of Truth and different things, and when I have talks with people, they always say, well, it's all about the plants and, we're plant people. And I'm like, no, you know what? I'm not a plant person. I'm advocating people going inside their own minds for answers and healing. And whether they do that with a plant or they do it with some synthetic element like ketamine, or they do it through meditation. Like, I don't really care how they get there as long as they get there. And I'm acknowledging that we're so conditioned by society and all these outside forces that they probably need one of these major catalysts to break them through and change their perspective immediately and bring them some more empathy. And once they do that, they're part of the solution right there.
Part of the critical mass, right? Part of the critical mass that we need. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. Daniel Pinchbeck, who is a psychedelic author, he just published a book called How Soon Is Now, which is about how the ecological crisis is going to really act as an initiation for kind of global consciousness. And I think as part of that, the psychedelic experience is going to get people thinking about these things. And obviously, whether that's through plant medicines or whether that's through synthetics like LSD or ketamine or MDMA, I think, I want to reemphasize what you said. The important part is having the experience, exploring your own consciousness, and coming out better as a result of it.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
That's it. That's awesome. Yeah. And, we're living in this really golden moment right now where, to Daniel's point, how soon is now? I'd say now is right now, because you can get into the now in a second. We just have to educate people about the opportunities. And like one of them, I want to talk about for a minute about my own ibogaine experience, because that was like one of these things where I always kept telling myself, I was, of course, intrigued about ibogaine being the most powerful psychedelic known to man, this African root that can break addiction in 8 hours and can transform you. I was always wowed by what it sounded like, but I was like always, of course, a bit apprehensive about what that meant to do it. And I kept on thinking, well, I don't have an addiction to like heroin or something like that where I need to do it. It's just like, I feel like maybe I need to have the experience at some point. And I had that in my consciousness, and I got the opportunity to go and do some ibogaine in the right set and setting with a master guide and shaman. And that was, again, one of the most profound experiences of my life, along with my ayahuasca experience in the jungle in Peru, where I already knew, that, like, say, the big picture was that we were all frequency and stuff. But sometimes when you see it and it's shown to you in these different ways, you get that, oh, you know what? Not only do I get this, but when I come back out of this, I got to live every single day with this knowledge on the forefront. And I got to, just live every day to its fullest with this understanding. And it's like a reaffirmation of how to live your every day. And so for people who haven't done ibogaine, it's definitely a rite of passage because it's so visual. It's different than the ayahuasca and the mushrooms and the ketamine and all these different things, because to a person that's done ibogaine, the experiences are so visually real. They're visually like you're watching a movie of your life, or there's a computer showing, searching what you're looking for and then coming up and showing you the search results and showing you the movie of what you're thinking about or asking about or trying to understand. And so it's so visual that it's incredible, number one. And then number two, I had an experience where the shaman said, come up with 2 or 3 people, put your intent on 2 or 3 people that you want to meet during your ibogaine experience, that you're going to meet at the soul level. So they could be alive or they could be dead, but you're going to have a meeting with them at the soul level. That's going to happen. And I was like, I kind of was like, I hope, but whatever. And I wrote down, and the one that I really focused my intent on for whatever reason was the late comedian Chris Farley. And I just kept thinking like, oh man, wow, what a guy. I'd love to hang out with him and just have a crazy time. And just like, I wonder, and boom, middle of my ibogaine experience. There I am, like standing next to him, like I'm like it's a regular day, and I'm with Chris Farley, and we're at this party, and it's like it's going on, and we're laughing, and everything's going. And in that experience, it kind of went dark at a certain point in that experience where we were hanging out, and then all the people, maybe 100 people that were at this party, they started to tell jokes that were like mean or not cool and just not even funny kind of thing. And they were laughing like hysterical. And Farley and I were looking at each other like, what the hell is going on here? Like what? And it got really dark and stuff. And Farley basically just looked at me and he's like, you know what? He's like, see, that's why you can't try to make everybody laugh. He's like, because like, if they're laughing at this, like, how are you going to beat yourself up that you're trying to get them to laugh? Like, this is what a lesson. And I was like, holy shit. And boom, I moved on to my next experience. But I was like, wow, the fact that I hung out with Chris Farley and on that level, and it was so real. And I've heard, Daniel Pinchbeck tell the story about his ibogaine experience, how it helped him to quit drinking and what that experience itself was like. And you can see that the ibogaine, not only does it physically detox all of the opiates and tobacco and alcohol and everything out of your system, even if you shot heroin the night before, it'll detox it right out of your body and you'll be clean and sober. But these experiences of looking at your life, being able to look with that clarity, you can't really do that any other way. I don't even see how that's possible. So we need a critical mass of people either using these master plants, using ayahuasca, ibogaine, San Pedro, ketamine, LSD, on and on. And I think, ultimately microdosing, like we were talking about, microdosing LSD, like Timothy Leary said, that would have been what Ritalin became if it hadn't been vilified. Everybody would be just microdosing LSD for ADHD and everything, and everybody be doing well. But instead, they vilified LSD and made it into something it's not. And so it was illegal. And then they had to come up with stuff like Ritalin and things that are, not as natural. Because a lot of people think, oh, LSD, that's all chemicals. I'd never do that. And you're like, well, you probably know then that LSD is synthesized, it's basically bacteria growing on a rye seed that creates that acid. And we're just synthesizing and making the same thing as what grows naturally on a rye seed. So if you want to do some LSD from a rye seed, no problem. We'll get you some natural LSD.
Exactly.
Don't try to claim it's chemicals,
Right.
So,
And on that same point, I was talking with someone for a podcast like a couple weeks ago, and he's like, and you had talked about this as well, manna in the Bible, and mentioning it, talking about it as being a mushroom. He had a really interesting perspective as well in terms of it could have been like an ergot fungus, and that they synthesize like some type of LSD like molecule or compound from it as well. So it's like,
I wouldn't doubt it. I really wouldn't. Our point in the reality of truth of talk about manna in the Bible maybe being mushrooms, or like you're saying, some kind of an ergot, some spore. Every single religion has meditation at some point in it, and it also has herbal and plant medicine in it for transcending and having a God-conscious experience. We've just taken that out of the religion in our modern society. Deepak said when we were talking about the manna too, manna, there's a plant called Soma, Soma, that's mentioned in his Vedic tradition. Soma is mentioned in the Rig Veda, the book, great book, the Rig Veda. It's mentioned over 100 times in the Rig Veda, the Soma. And if you read the description of the Soma in the Rig Veda using modern science, where it says things like it's a plant that doesn't come from a seed, which obviously mushrooms are the only plant that doesn't come from a seed. They're spores. And so Deepak said, so obviously it's mushrooms. He said they just don't call it mushrooms. They don't identify it in that way because they're veiling it. Maybe some people, need to come to it. Maybe they couldn't handle it in that context, so they veiled it a little bit. But when you look at it and you read that description, and then you read in the Rig Veda how the shaman are talked about and using the soma and drinking from the urine of the stags, of the reindeer. That's a very basic shamanic practice with reindeer and mushrooms. And so even in the Vedic tradition, even in our Bible and things, there's very clear reference to psychedelic plants, putting people in that transcendental state, but they don't call it necessarily by the name because, either it's been changed for all kinds of reasons, or, like Deepak said, maybe some people need to come to it. It was better that they kind of called it soma, this mystery plant, and then some people came to it in the right way at the right time.
Well, yeah, there's like a sense of mystery that surrounds it, right? There's a sense. I mean, this is true too of what they used to do in like ancient Greece when they had these mystery, the Eleusinian mysteries, where they would go out into the woods and drink kykeon, which was like a beverage that was made of ergot. It was supposed to be secret, it was supposed to be, because that in itself was like an initiation, and that in itself kind of, again, this sense of mystery lent itself to mysticism and lent itself to going beyond kind of flesh and body and this kind of current reality. So I feel like it fits in nice to that.
True. And then, you think about the fact that, back then people were very in touch with nature and they were living in nature. And so, but now we're so disconnected from nature. Some of the people that are having depression and addiction, part of their underlying issue is that they're disconnected from nature. So here are these plants that are available to us. And I even said it to the religious people. I talked to Joel Osteen in The Reality of Truth, and Marcus and Joni Lamb from Daystar, and Ravi Zacharias, the preacher, and some rabbis, and just all these people. And when I talked to them about religion, and then I'd start talking to them about plant medicine and things like that, and whatever resistance I would get, I would say to them, I would try to use their terms, and I would say, okay, well, you believe strongly in God, right? And they're like, absolutely. And I would say, okay, and you believe God has infinite wisdom, correct? And they go, yes. I go, okay, well, doesn't it make sense that God, having infinite wisdom of everything, would have put some natural things here on earth to help us to tap into spirituality and healing? Like, wouldn't that just make sense that some plants would grow that are here to help us tap into that? And they would kind of go silent, like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, but it was so shocking that, again, I don't hold it against them. This is what everybody's been taught, and this is what society's, it's been mysterious for a long time. But I think nature knows that we're in a crisis situation. People need healing right now, major diseases, depression, stress, and it's bringing out these plants. And quite frankly, who knows, maybe it even brought the internet out to help bring out the plants. But
global consciousness, I've heard that as well, and I think that's definitely it makes sense. There are aspects of it that make sense.
Yeah, and like the shaman says, we think, as humans, we're having this human experience, and we think, oh, we're the highest level of consciousness, and we think and all this, and we control the animals and the plants and all that. And meanwhile, here we are actually working for the plants, for that matter. They're rooted in the ground, they can't move around, so they have humans moving around and animals moving around and watering them and feeding them and tending to them, and and we're the ones that are doing a lot of the work for the plants, like they need us to do, or they need nature to do, as opposed to, I think the big mistake when we look back at what the damage was that was caused by this misinformation, this bad information about plants and going inside your mind and how you get to a spiritual place. All that bad information, when it's looked at years and years later, people are going to say, there was this opportunity. And what really set us back was that misinformation, because we have these even naturally occurring things that are here that we can be tapping into. We just have to use them in the right way. So I think when history looks back, this is a really key moment where people are accessing the information, taking care of their own health. They know we're in this crisis moment and they're, at the precipice. And these plant medicines that have been around for millions of years, been used by societies since the beginning of humanism. We're going to break through that. And then the idea is going to be that we realize that our mistake was we're having this human experience where, we think humans are at the top and that everything's here for us. And we're and not realizing that that's what's limiting us. And that if we can transcend beyond our human experience and have more empathy and have a different perspective, that we might realize that, we're not the highest conscious thing going on, and maybe we're actually disrupting it right now, but we have the ability to instantly tap into that universal consciousness, God consciousness, and they're growing out of the ground all over the place right here for us.
Well, let's wrap up this conversation just by, what are your next plans? I know before we, started recording, you mentioned you're working on a new documentary. Do you have any other big things that are going on for you and psychedelics?
My mission is just to advocate as much as I can in whatever way I can to, get to the critical mass. And so, I'm looking for opportunities that occur like like the New York Times was for me, one of these critical mass places that people are looking at under a microscope at different points where a concentrated amount of consciousness is focused. And if you can affect that consciousness, then you can do a lot more than you could do through traditional means. And so I'm constantly looking for those. And I just want to give you one wrap-up example of what I mean. There's like an effect that I call the Dave Matthews effect. And that is that Dave Matthews, the artist, musician, instead of doing what he else does, go around and, when you want to get big in music and famous, you go around the country, you tour around, you play every, college town and all these little towns, you try to develop a following. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and so forth and a lot of luck. And what Dave Matthews did instead was he went to Nantucket, which is an island off Massachusetts, a very wealthy place in the world. He went to Nantucket for the summer, and he just played basically all summer in Nantucket, and people heard him. And then all of these wealthy kids who were in Nantucket for the summer, they went back to their school in Boulder, Vermont, or, wherever, California, who knows, but these were like cultural creatives. These were the influencers. And they went back to their school after being in Nantucket for the summer, and they were like, oh my God, you got to hear Dave Matthews. Here's his stuff. You got to get some of his music and go see his show. And boom, Dave Matthews tipped himself in one, summer in Nantucket bigger than he ever could have if he just, toured around for years and years and years and years, because he was affecting a certain consciousness that was concentrated. So I saw, a month ago or something like that everybody was, after the election, was micro-focused on what was happening and the news that was coming out. And I thought, the New York Times, the opportunity to put a message in there, not, that's educational, not just to the president, but to all of the executives that read it, all the advertising people, all the medical people, all the, students, all the, the United Nations type people, everything going on in New York and society and all these influencers. It was like a Dave Matthews moment. And so I had to take that opportunity to educate about ibogaine and other psychedelics. And so that's what I'm looking for, whether it's in a, TV format, a documentary follow-up that I'm working on actively to, show, to really bring out where we are today, to attending the Psychedelic Science 2017 coming up in a couple months or in a month and a half. I'm going to do a Q&A. They're going to screen the movie, The Reality of Truth, and I'm going to do a Q&A with Aubrey Marcus. And, so those moments where you have a critical mass of people that you can affect about psychedelics as an advocate, I think you need to take advantage of those moments. And that's where you're going to find me. Wherever those things are, that's where I'm going to be.
Good. And I think that's a great way to end our conversation. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you on here and share, the wisdom that you've gathered from both your professional and business life, but also obviously from your experiences with plants and ketamine and some others. So again, Zappy, thanks so much for spending your time with us. And where can people find you? Where's a good way, to find your documentary or these other resources that you have?
Yeah. So one of the best places to go is zappy.com, zappy.com. And there's some links there. The realityoftruth.com, there's access to the movie and so forth. And then yourmindhasrights.org is a site dedicated to, trying to get to the critical mass we're talking about, to demand the right, to get enough people just demanding the right to go inside their own minds. So those are the best ways, and the pleasure's mine, because what you're doing and just getting this information out, it's about building that critical mass. So this show, the next guest you have on, somebody that is on 6 months from now, they could be the person that tips that critical mass. So it's like we're all playing our role. So I totally appreciate you doing this show, and people that are listening and are doing their part and passing it along. It's like, that's all. We're just going in support of nature.
Absolutely. That's a great way to wrap up. Thanks again, Zappy.
All right. You too. Have a great night.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelia Podcast with Paul Austin. Want more psychedelic information? Go to our website at thethirdwave.co and register for our email list and newsletter. Also, please consider donating to The Third Wave via our Patreon page. Donations make this podcast possible. Psychedelics have the potential to transform lives. By donating, you enable us to continue to inform people about the benefits of these powerful substances.